So let's now start the talk. So I've started with this mantra, some may say a cliche, all we need is love. Maybe some of you are old enough to remember that the Beatles had the song, All You Need Is Love. And then later on came the song, All We Need Is Love, which is probably a more humble and more correct statement of the matter. And so this is the mantra that all great religions have had, great world poetry, great world literature, and it's also, of course, very popular among songwriters. So it's something that, in a sense, we grew up with, we all know, and it's a kind of insight and a wisdom that humanity, through many, many hundreds of years or thousands of years, has, in a sense, symbolized in this very, very short sentence. But the question that we want to address today is, okay, that's right, but how do we create love? How do we create love in the individual? How do we create love between individuals in human relationships? And how do we create love in an increasingly loveless or love deficient populations across the world and globally? So how do we, as an engineer and scientist, you may say, okay, it's fair enough to say all we need is love, but how do you manufacture it? How do you produce it? And that's really the theme of today's talk and next week's talk. So we want to address this fundamental statement in a scientific way and come up with a protocol as a kind of engineering protocol, how we can engineer love within an individual, between individuals, and in societies. So that's the goal that we have. Now, this talk is in two parts. First part is today's talk, and next part is next week at the same time. And in today's talk, I'm going to address 3 pairs of questions. So the first part is what is self-attachment or algorithmic human development? So self-attachment has got abbreviation SAT, which can stand for self-attachment theory. It can stand for self-attachment technique, because anyone can use this technique. And it can also stand for self-attachment therapy for people who want to use that as a kind of treatment and therapy. So SAT stands for at least 3 different notions. So what is SAT and what does it bring? So that's the first pair of questions. Then the second pair is, what problems does SAT solve? And how is it related to AI, artificial intelligence? Because AI solves a lot of problems. So does SAT solve some problems? And if so, what are these problems? And finally, the third part, how does SAT work in practice? And what is the underlying model for self-attachment? So we start with the first pair of questions. So what is self-attachment? Well, in a nutshell, in just a few lines, self-attachment is a holistic technique. Holistic means that it addresses the person as a whole. It doesn't address any particular issue that the person may have. It's a holistic technique. It can be used by any person with any kind of symptom or problem or motivation for change. It's a holistic technique to replace our suboptimal emotional, cognitive, and behavioral patterns with more optimal ones. So what does this mean? Well, we may all have had difficult times in our life, in our childhood and later on. And because of the difficulties we have encountered, or even without having difficulties, because of the fact that we never choose to be born in which culture, in which nation, and in which family, and so on. Therefore, there may be in our background some patterns that we have, in a sense, interiorized, we have developed in ourselves that have become patterns, very steady and continuous ingrained patterns in ourselves. And they can be emotional patterns, cognitive patterns, and behavioral patterns in the way we deal with our emotions, in the way we have our thoughts, and in the way we behave, that they may not be really optimal. There may be better ways of handling our emotions, better ways of thinking about things, and better way of behaving. And therefore, SAT is a way of addressing all these problems and trying to replace these suboptimal patterns with more optimal patterns. So that's, in one sentence, the definition of self-attachment. And its distinguished features are as follows. So I've put it in red because it's essentially the hallmark of self-attachment. So in self-attachment, you fall in love with your childhood self so that you passionately can love that child. So you may think this is strange and even funny because, okay, how can you fall in love with your childhood self? This is something that we never do. No one has done that. But if you think about it, I mean, for thousands of years, we have been in love with our deities all across the world in these religions. Then in today's world, not only falling in love with deities still continues for a substantial section of the population in all countries, but also we fall in love with our heroes. We fall in love with our favorite singer, with our favorite actor or actress. We fall in love with our favorite football player, with our favorite poet, and so on and so forth. And sometimes when we fall in love with a person, we may never have really met them. So this is obviously true for falling in love with deities, but it's also true that people fall in love with singers that they have never met, not even in concerts. Maybe you fall in love with a singer in Australia or in Africa or somewhere else. You have never met the person face to face. So it is possible to fall in love with something in an imaginative way. And this is why falling in love with your childhood self imaginatively, so that you can passionately love that child, so I emphasize the word that child, can actually take place. And our pilot projects show that this can actually happen. So the issue is that we make an affectional bond with our childhood self using our childhood photos, our favorite childhood photos, and also we use our disliked childhood photos, or we use virtual reality. In these days, we can really use new technology to be able to interact with our childhood self as we were decades ago through virtual reality. So using our photographs, we can create avatars which look very much like ourselves when we were children. So you can even interact in a virtual reality environment with your childhood self. So this is possible. And then what self-attachment does is that it uses this very strong, passionate bonding that you have made with this child. So that child becomes this child now. So I said that child before because we are usually not connected with the child that we were. We are connected in today's social networking paradigm with everyone except ourselves. In particular, we are not really that much connected with the child that we were. So we start with loving that child, but soon that child becomes this child, very close to you. And then you re-raise imaginatively, but according to very well-defined protocols, you re-raise this child emotionally toward emotional maturity by playing a double role-playing game. And in that sense, self-attachment becomes a game and can be very fun. Initially, it can be difficult because to establish that passionate falling in love with your childhood self takes 2 or 3 weeks of relatively hard work, usually, not for everyone, but usually, and certainly for some people, it's essentially initially hard work. But that's true for everything in life. Everything just going to pay off substantially is not going to come about easily. So if you want to make huge achievements in your life, you have to endure some hardship. And self-attachment is no exception. So you need to have dedication and devotion for the first few weeks of making this passionate love and falling in love. But then it can become very, very fun because it's a double role-playing game. Okay, so that is self-attachment. And what does it bring for you? Well, it produces self-compassion through compassion towards that child and through the love that you have for that child. You experience self-love. And once you experience strong, healthy self-love, so I emphasize the word strong and healthy self-love, because you can have pathological self-love, and we have seen what pathological self-love can do. We saw that for 4 years in the United States. So if you have pathological self-love, that's very different from healthy self-love. And the distinction is that when you have healthy self-love, then you can use that to transfer your love to be compassionate towards everyone and to Mother Nature and to life in general. Whereas sickly self-love, pathological self-love, is just loving yourself. You never go beyond yourself. And you can never transfer pathological narcissistic love to other people. If you are relying on others, if you speak positively of others, it's only because you want to use them for your own narcissistic needs. So there's a sharp distinction between healthy self-love and sickly or pathological self-love. So self-attachment allows you to have healthy and strong self-love that you can then transfer as compassion to everyone and to Mother Nature. And then SAT protocols can be learned by an adult in an 8-weekly group course. So 8 sessions, 8 weekly sessions would be enough for you to learn to practice SAT. And then after that, you can integrate the protocols in your everyday life. So you don't really need to have special sessions. You just carry on with your routine life. But now you have been habituated, you are used to, because you have learned new technique for 8 weeks. And 8 weeks is the time that you get used to something, that you habituate to a particular behavior. You become used to that, and therefore you just carry on doing that because you feel rewarded by performing that technique. And what this ensures is continued growth for you for life. So SAT enables you, by just 8 weeks of training, to continually grow emotionally in your life until you're alive. So that was the first part. The second part, okay, so what problems does self-attachment solve, and how is it related to artificial intelligence? Well, okay, so in clinical population, so people who suffer from mental illness, mental disorder, well, we know that people who are on psychiatric medication, they always desire to be treated, to be well, so that they can give up on the medication and to experience really normal health and to experience self-mastery and agency. Because psychiatric medication really only alleviates symptoms. They don't treat the underlying disorder. Therefore, SAT can provide a way that people who have been or who are on medication can become resilient enough, strong enough in due course by enhancing their self-love, in a sense, to be able gradually to give up and to quit being on medication because they would no longer need that. And secondly, we all need more effective interventions. So people who are into psychotherapy and psychological rehabilitation, they know that existing techniques have all got their limitations, and especially for resistant mental disorders. For example, people who suffer from chronic conditions, existing techniques don't work. Therefore, we really need more effective interventions to tackle this global, if you want, pandemic of mental health problems that has been accentuated because of the coronavirus pandemic. So that's the first problem that self-attachment solves. But then, because it's a holistic technique and it can be used by anyone, whether they've got mental issues, psychological issues, clinically diagnosed by a professional or not, just from the normal population, the non-clinical population. In this population, what self-attachment does, that it enhances social and emotional intelligence and creativity. And in this talk, I have abbreviated social and emotional intelligence and creativity by SAIC. So SAIC stands for the combination of three traits: social intelligence, emotional intelligence, and creativity. So it stands for the initials of these four words. And therefore, by enhancing SAIC, you will boost your mental health. We can all be benefiting from a boost to our mental health. It's like doing physical exercise. When we do physical exercise, our physical body gets benefits. We become stronger physically. In the same sense, we can use a mental health boost, and SAT provides a holistic mental health boost. And then the issue is that SAT increases the quality of life, not just for the individual who practices self-attachment, but the quality of life for the people around those individuals. So maybe the whole family, maybe the whole workplace, and so on. They will all benefit from just one person becoming more socially and emotionally intelligent and creative. So this holds groups of people and not just individuals. And at a higher level, if we can enhance SAIC in populations, so let's say 10% of the population, even 5% of the population, then SAIC will help us to solve hard problems, socially and globally hard problems that we face. And this includes not just problems at a national or regional level, but global existential problems that we face, problems that have been worsening actually in the past couple of decades at least. So they have been there all the time in the 20th century, especially in the latter part of the 20th century. But in the past few decades, and especially in the past few years, they have become worse and worse with no effective solution that has been implemented to really counter them, to resolve these problems. So we are all familiar with this. There are at least a dozen of them. I don't want to go through all of them, but we all know about global warming, habitat destruction, things that have caused, in a sense, the pandemic of coronavirus, global warming that is really threatening life on the whole planet, not just human lives, but life on the whole planet. environmental crisis, growing social inequalities, both at the national level within each country, but also globally between developing and developed countries, the threat of nuclear war, conflicts like the one in the Middle East. And we have seen that in the past week in the Palestinian-Israeli conflict. So we have seen this conflict for decades now, and it's got the same players, the same policies adopted and put forward by these players, and there seems to be no end in sight. There are good solutions for the problem in the Middle East, in not just the Palestinian-Israeli conflict, but for all problems in the Middle East. There are good solutions for all these existential problems, but unfortunately, because of profit, material interests, vested interest of various sections of the populations, there are huge obstacles, and these good solutions cannot really be implemented, and they find no headway to even to make a start on these existential problems. And the underlying reason is that these problems, if you think about it, they are rooted in our instinct that we share with animals to dominate the other people. So as animals try to dominate others, we try, as human beings, we try to dominate by our greed for money, for power, etc., etc. So it's the destructive instinct. So the aggression is directed towards others, becomes destructive, and it causes all these problems worldwide. And we then have various people with vested interests for obstacles because of their policies and because of their power towards solving these problems. But the fact of the matter now is that unlike the previous century, in which we could say that we were in a kind of zero-sum game. Well, some people would win and some people would lose. But now, because of the gravity of these problems, the globalization of these problems, like global warming, habitat destruction, and other problems, we are no longer in a zero-sum game. In a sense, we will either all lose or we will all win. So, and that's very true of the pandemic. We already know we are all safe or no one is safe. And that's the slogan of WHO. And this is true not just of the pandemic, but about all the existential problems that we are facing. We have reached, in a sense, the state of being in a non-zero sum game. So we are at the brink of a catastrophe, if you want. So the catastrophe could take a few decades to completely unfold. But it's obvious that if we don't do something effective about it, then it will just unfold itself, because we are going towards that. And in another way of looking at things, you can say that the level of sex, the level of social and emotional intelligence and creativity in the populations at large, so this includes everyone, that level, the average level, is not high enough for us to solve these problems. So some people may have that emotional intelligence and social intelligence and the creativity to come up with a solution. But for the average person in the population, that is not yet the case. So these problems, although they do have good solutions, they never get a solution actually implemented. Therefore, that is the way we can link the problem of social and emotional intelligence and creativity to existential problems that we are facing. So it's not just dealing with hard problems socially and at personal level that self-attachment can help. If we can have self-attachment in populations, 10%, let's say 15% of the population, that will make a huge difference for us to be able to solve our existential problems. To adapt to the new conditions that globalization has brought about, what we need is to raise sake on average in the population, significantly raise the social and emotional intelligence and creativity of the human individuals so that we can have more love in an increasingly loveless or love deficient world. We can have really more love, so we can create more love so that we can have more cooperation, a more equitable sharing of resources, and a new social contract, which can really tackle the existential problems that we are facing. And in a sense, there is a good analogy for this, because if you go back thousands of years, when we're making a transition from barbarism, nomadic life, to civilization, settled life in agricultural land and in towns and so on, the level of social and emotional intelligence of humanity needed to be raised so that we could give away the kind of moral and social outlook that we had as nomadic people, to have more social and emotional intelligence, to be able to live in harmony with a much larger group of people in a town, for example. So that's the analogy with what we are facing now. We need a much higher level of sake to be able to effectively tackle the problems that we face. So thousands of years ago, it was the great religions that provided, I mean, they were not based on science, but they provided in a way the kind of emotional and ethical and moral underpinning for humans to be able to adapt to the new situation, to have more compassion for each other and live in peace with each other as much as they could have done. Anyway, they were living much more in peace than when they were having nomadic lives. So that's the kind of thing that we now need when we are facing these existential challenges. And there's a grand bargain. There's a grand bargain for people who are, in a sense, addicted to their greed for money and power. There's a grand bargain for them because they can acquire creativity in many hundreds of different ways of human active life in exchange for giving up their destructive impulses and their destructive greed to dominate the others through wealth and power, fame, and so on and so forth. Because obviously, creativity is much more rewarding than piling up, accumulating billions and billions of dollars, than ruling over a whole people. People who accumulate billions and billions and rule in terms of power over millions of people, very soon after they die, or maybe a couple of generations after they die, they will be completely mortal as far as human civilization is concerned. But creativity, look at people who have been extremely creative or who have been even creative enough. They become, in a sense, immortal. And to be creative leaves a better legacy, a more rewarding legacy for people who are addicted to becoming power hungry and wealth hungry. And therefore, that's a grand bargain that can be offered to actually change the climate to change the orientation of these people so that they, in a sense, sublimate or redirect their aggression towards creativity rather than towards more power and more wealth. And this is what SAT, self-attachment, tries to do, because by redirecting our aggression to creativity, because creativity is, in a sense, based on aggression. If we don't have aggression, we can't create something new, a new paradigm, a new solution to a problem, because we have to, in a sense, go over beyond existing paradigms. So that there's an aggressive impulse there. There's an aggressive orientation there. So aggression can be redirected from being destructive against other human beings towards creativity, which can be for the good of the whole human beings. And therefore, self-attachment, by enhancing sake, can play a significant role in solving our hard problems, including our existential problems. All right, so now a comparison between artificial intelligence. So as you know, since 1950s, since Alan Turing proposed his ideas for artificial intelligence, we have been developing for 70 years, we have been developing algorithms in the mirror image of the way human mind computes to make electronic machines computationally intelligent, so that machines or electronic machines can compute faster with much less error, or even with no error, compared to human beings. And we have seen the consequences and the rewards and the benefits of that. We have all been benefiting from AI. Well, AI has got a dark side as well. I don't want to go through that. We all know about that. The issue of, for example, killer robots, the issue of killer soldiers, robotic soldiers, the issue of surveillance, the issue of various companies like Cambridge Analytica influencing people even in elections and so on in a subconscious way. It's got a dark side, and it's a very significant dark side, but surely enough, it's had very, very beneficial effects as well. And every year, hundreds of billions of dollars are spent, and tens of thousands of highly talented young researchers are mobilized in this endeavor, in this venture, to make AI more successful in a sense, to make artificial intelligence to capture more domains of activity, so that the electronic computer, the robot in a sense, if you want, can mimic more and more what the human beings do in terms of their cognitive activities. But compared to the real needs of the human race at the moment and life on this planet, and as I've explained, the real urgent need that we have, the burning need that we have, is to enhance the average level of social and emotional intelligence and creativity in populations. That is really urgently needed for us to be able to resolve by tackling our existential problems effectively. So in comparison to AI, almost nothing is spent on developing protocols for human development, developing protocols for enhancing human intelligence, social, emotional intelligence of human beings, and their creativity. So these three features, emotional intelligence, social intelligence, and creativity, they distinguish us from even higher apes. So higher apes, of course, can be socially intelligent, emotionally intelligent, but no way the way we are. So we are distinguished as a species by this. So higher apes can also be creative, but no way the way we are. We are distinguished from higher apes and all other animals, of course, by being much more socially, emotionally creative. At least that potential exists innately in all of us. But to really tackle our problems, we have to potentiate that we have to make that into really an effective enhancement for the average person in all populations, so that we can really tackle our problems. And now, because of the progress in developmental science and neuroscience, so these sciences were in a very rudimentary stage when Alan Turing came up with this idea of AI 70 years ago. But now we've got the knowledge, the expertise in developmental psychology and neuroscience and related fields, artificial neural networks and so on, to be able to develop those protocols for enhancing emotional intelligence, social intelligence, and creativity in human beings. So we have the resources. It's not immediately profitable, and that's why these big giants, big tech giants, are not paying any attention to this in a sense. Anything which doesn't provide them with billions of dollars of profit immediately or in medium term, they just dismiss, or they have even no incentive to look at. The problem hasn't even been raised for them. But if you think carefully about the state of the human race now, we see that this is exactly what we need. Protocols which can be exercised, not just by people who are suffering from psychological issues, but for the average person in the normal populations, in the clinical population, so that they can raise their humanity in a sense. By raising their humanity, they can challenge the problems that we are facing collectively. So self-attachment tries to develop and has been an attempt to develop such protocols using people who have got high levels of sake as their model. So in the same way that electronic computers are created in the mirror image of the human mind, the way human mind makes its computations, in the same way, what SAT, self-attachment technique, does is that we look how people who are highly socially intelligent, emotionally intelligent, and creative, how they have reached that stage, what sort of a background they have had, what interactions they had early in their childhood, what kind of activities they embarked on later on, which made them so successful in these three very noble features that humanity has. Then, so taking them as a model, we do reverse engineering. So that's the model. So let's extrapolate the protocol which made them into such noble human beings in a sense, and try to make everyone noble enough in a sense, so that everyone can realize the noble potential to become more emotionally and socially intelligent and creative, and not just a few. For everyone, this could become a possibility. And therefore, the solution is to raise sake in the populations. And sorry, I've already done this. So this is a comparison. I want to speed up a little bit between electronic computers and the human system, the human brain, if you want. So the architecture of electronic computers is the hardware, the chips. For human beings, it's the human brain. But there's this analogy between machine algorithms, algorithms for AI, and human development algorithms or self-attachment protocols. There's this analogy, and the reason for this analogy is that algorithms for the electronic computers are developed in the mirror image of the human mind. It's developed in the image of human psychology. So it's not alien to the way, it's not far from the way the human brain works. It's been inspired by the way the human brain works. That's why there is this close analogy. Of course, there are differences. So the operating system for electronic computers has got its counterpart as the human individual self. So we are our own operators in a sense. The foundational basis of electronic computers, computer science, AI, or logic, mathematics, and psychology Whereas for human self-organized systems, for the human brain, it's neuroplasticity. So neuroplasticity is our brain's capacity, especially the human brain's capacity, to continue to grow and change in response to life experiences, in a sense, by learning. And the way we learn is by repetition. So we all know this. As children, we learned the basic arithmetic operations, the basic alphabet by repetition. So we learn this by iterating various equations. 2 times 2 is 4, 3 times 3 is 9, by repeating various words over and over again until we learned them. And by learning them, we changed our brain. The neural circuits in the brain changed. So it's become part of us. This is our mother tongue, our native tongue. And learning basic arithmetic operations is something that we carry on. We don't easily forget. So the guiding principle between the two is an entertaining comparison to examine. So for electronic computers and AI, the guiding principle is that what humans can do cognitively for cognitive tasks, machines, electronic machines, AI can also learn to do. For human development, for algorithmic human development or self-attachment, the guiding principle is that humans can learn any optimal behavior that some selected people have already shown. People who are highly intelligent socially, emotionally, and are highly creative. We can learn that behavior. Creativity and being highly intelligent is not something that only some people are born with. No, it's something that we can acquire. In every one of us, the potential for that exists. And if we work at it, we can attain and realize our full potential in that domain. And then the programs, so we know about computer programs, software. For algorithmic human development, the counterpart is action programs. We learn by various actions. For example, repeating various arithmetic operations as children, repeating words of alphabet. By carrying out certain actions, we go through learning by repetition. Another fancy word for it is long-term potentiation, which invokes neuroplasticity and changes the neural circuits in the brain. So we learn, and our brain learns for good that sort of behavior, if you keep repeating that, of course. If you don't do it for a very long time, there's a danger that we forget, of course. But the most important difference, I would say, between electronic computers and their algorithms and the human brain and algorithmic human development is that for electronic computers, an algorithm which doesn't work within seconds and minutes, people really are not very much interested in usually. They kind of dismiss that and search for better algorithms which work in seconds or minutes. But in terms of algorithmic human development, we need weeks or months, because to habituate to a particular pattern of behavior, pattern of cognitive behavior, pattern of emotional behavior. So for that, you really need at least 2 months through repetition and long-term potentiation and the neuroplasticity. So it's something that you need to work harder for a longer period of time. If, of course, you suffer from serious psychological trauma in your childhood, then the learning would take longer. But it's something that can be achieved. All right, so the last part is about how does it work and what is the underlying model. Okay, so the way it works is that we enhance sake in human beings by enhancing and significantly increasing 3 traits, 3 simple traits that we can concretely identify with. So social and emotional intelligence can be a little bit abstract, but compassion, cheerfulness, very easy. Huh? And creativity, of course, is something that we all know about. So it's easy to remember this because it can be remembered as 3 C's to become more compassionate, more cheerful, and more creative. And the way we do it, as I said, we just reverse engineer. We look at people who are very compassionate. So this means compassion towards yourself and towards others, very cheerful, very happy, but also creative. We look for people who have got these 3 traits, and we do reverse engineering to find protocols which enable them to achieve this noble status in a sense. And the model that we have comes in a sense from attachment theory, and that's why we have got the word self-attachment. So attachment theory is a paradigm, scientific paradigm in developmental psychology. Essentially, it says that the optimal interactions between parents and their infants, their children, would lead to a kind of secure attachment for the child, so that the child learns gradually to manage their emotions or self-regulate their emotions. And then they will just inherit this from their good enough parents. They interiorize, in a sense, this capacity for emotion management or self-regulation of emotions. And that will be the basis of their emotional and social intelligence for life. So this is something that we really would benefit from if we are lucky enough to acquire as a strong, secure attachment with both parents and other primary caregivers maybe in our childhood. That will also be very, very beneficial. Because if you don't have secure attachment as a child with both parents, if there are problems in the interactions with one or both parents or with other primary caregivers, then you may have some sort of insecure attachment to primary caregivers. And this could become the source of becoming prone to psychological issues later in life, and in severe cases to mental health problems. Therefore, the self-attachment model is that we take the interaction between the parent and child, the good enough parent and the child, and we imagine that this is embedded in the individual human brain. So we think of the individual human brain as consisting of 2 parts: the adult self, the rational part, the thinking part of the self, representing, in a sense, the embodiment of the parent, the good enough parent. So this is the part which is rational thinking, and when we are stress-free, this part is dominant in us. And then there's this part is more rooted in the left brain. Then there's the other part, the faculty or the agent, we call it the child self or the child agent, which is more rooted in the right brain. And this is the more emotional, the emotive part, which in a sense represents that, that child, which is mostly about emotions, initially at least, certainly in the first year, and to a large extent still in the second year and in the following years. Only gradually the prefrontal cortex and cognition develops in infants. And if we have got some problems in our childhood, even if we don't have problems, usually our emotional world is still representing the emotional world of that child that we were. So although we may graduate and have degrees and achieve in various professional lives, and our thinking faculty may develop, usually our emotional faculty doesn't develop as much, maybe not at all. And if it does develop to some extent, not as much as the thinking faculty usually. So usually our emotional world can be still representing that childhood self that we were. And we sort of carry the emotions that we still had as a child, especially if we had some problems. So therefore, the protocol is that we just follow Mother Nature. So Mother Nature has provided this protocol because for 200 million years in mammals, the way a mammal mother interacts with the offspring is that creates this affectional bond by various mechanisms like grooming and expressing affection in its own way. It creates an affectional bond, and based on that, it supports, nourishes that child, supports it from danger, and provides a basis for the child to explore the world and learn how to defend itself and how to be able to live independently as it grows up. So this protocol has been perfected by nature, we can say, in human beings, and therefore the self-attachment protocol is not really my innovation. I've stolen it from Mother Nature. All I've done is that I've extracted it as a computer scientist and mathematician. As you probably know, we are used to substituting. So I just substituted the thinking part, the thinking adult self of the individual for that mother, for that good enough mother, and the emotional part of the individual for that child, representing that childhood self in the decades beforehand. And so using that protocol provided by nature, we just simulate that protocol as close as we can. So the adult self connects compassionately with the child self by using the photos of their childhood or VR, imaginatively creates this passionate bond with the child by singing, dancing, and play. So we emulate exactly what good enough parents and primary caregivers do with their beloved children and infants. And this produces strong, healthy self-love for the individual itself. And this becomes the basis of compassion towards others and love for life and work as well, which is the basis of creativity. And therefore, the adult re-raises the child by emulating optimal parent-child interactions on their own, and then we acquire secure attachment that we have in attachment theory, but this is secure attachment with ourselves. It's not secure attachment with our parents, it's not secure attachment with our mother, it's not secure attachment with our friend or mate, it's secure attachment with ourselves, which makes us more independent. All right, so
sorry, Professor Adel, I just wonder if we can, just to be on the schedule, can we have it completed in 5 minutes?
Yes, I will finish in 5 minutes. So the second C is how to be cheerful, and the answer is by laughing. So I will spend more time on this next week, so I'm not going to spend too much time on this. So all I wanted to say is that though these theories that have been proclaimed by various philosophers about humor and laughter, and but evolutionary psychologists in recent decades have understood the laughter and humor as a play signal. And what we do is that we say you only become happy if you're able to laugh. And that's the important thing. If we don't laugh enough, if we don't laugh on a daily basis enough, we can't stay cheerful and happy. So we have to learn to laugh in order to become cheerful. And the way we laugh is to have a very overarching theory that we can laugh in response to any change that we see either objectively in the outside world or we perceive subjectively in ourselves. So any change, whether subjective or objective, can be the stimuli for laughter. And therefore, we can learn to laugh. Some children from their parents learn to laugh at anything and everything. So even with respect to their misfortunes and tragedies, after maybe a small amount of time, they will be able to keep a distance from that trauma, that episode, and be able to laugh at it. And by doing that, they enhance their positive emotions. And by enhancing the positive emotion, they can tackle and resolve that problem, that tragedy, that misfortune in a better way. So learning to love is a fundamental need for learning, much more important than learning in deep learning networks and in artificial neural networks. So learning to love for all human beings is important. And there is a science for this. And we have developed the protocols based on theories of laughter that work for everyone, even people who are depressed, who usually don't really laugh at a joke. They can use these protocols that are customized so that they can laugh in any situation and even laugh at themselves and at their own misfortunes. This is the secret of being really always happy. And that happiness, of course, translates to creativity. So how to become creative? And the answer is by returning to the child mode. Again, I'm going to speak on this more next time. Essentially, the idea is that highly creative people have got a lot in common with children before children are corrupted, in a sense, by our educational system, which sort of thrives on assessment, surveillance, competition, and reward. When they are 3-4 years old, before they go to the harsh regime of schooling, they are spontaneous, flexible, inquisitive, independent. They have perseverance, lack of dogma. They experience all various opposite emotions, and most of all, they are playful. And these are exactly the important traits that highly creative people have. And that's why when we do self-attachment, we reactivate the child mode in us. And therefore, we allow ourselves exactly those traits that are the foundation of becoming creative. So we reignite those traits. And because of that, and because of the use of laughter, including self-laughter, we will be able to become as creative as it can be, as we can be, in a sense. So that's what we do next time. And my conclusion is that what we have to do is to restart life. We can do that with self-attachment. We have a strong and healthy self-love, which can enhance compassion, cheerfulness, and creativity. And so I've given the basic way how we can enhance this by creating a passionate bond with our childhood self and learning to laugh, including at ourselves, at any situation in due course, of course, and how to increase creativity by switching to our childhood self and reconnecting with our child. So next time, we have got these pairs of questions to address. What does practicing self-attachment involve? What do you go through when you practice self-attachment, first in those 8 weeks, and then later on as you integrate that in your life? Why does it work? What's the scientific basis in non-technical terms? What are the outcomes? What are the most specific outcomes? This is very important. I will talk extensively about that next time. And what are the liberating effects? Because I claim that we are not really free. We think we are free. Even people who are free of mental disorder, we are not really free because we were born in a culture we didn't choose. We were born in a family we did not choose. Some of the patterns that we have adopted them subconsciously or even unconsciously from our parents, from environment, from schooling, from our culture. So we haven't really chosen them freely. In that sense, our values are philosophical, social, ethical, moral values. We haven't really chosen them ourselves. Later in life, in a sense, it's a bit too late because they have been ingrained in our consciousness. But when we rerun our childhood and re-raise our childhood self to emotional maturity, we can give ourselves the chance to adopt new values. And I'll go through this extensively next time. Thank you for listening.
Wow, thank you so much, Professor Adalat. Although I'm working with you more than 3 years and going through the workshops and talks few times, but it's always a pleasure listening to your talks. Thank you, really, thanks a lot.